Welcome back to the Raven Files. Tonight we open a case where justice and revenge are separated by only one thin line. A young heir is found dead on a rain-soaked mountain road. The police call it an accident, but carved into the mud beside the wreckage are four chilling words: the vote has passed. Behind the crash lies a hidden online forum. A family destroyed by corruption and a man who never pulled the trigger but may have built the room where murder became inevitable. This is a story of bloodlines, guilt, and the terrible price of inherited sins. Tonight's case is Blood Runs in the Family. The rain did not stop in Chongqing. It came down in long grey sheets over the mountains, over the river, over the glass towers and the old alleys, and the half-finished construction sites where cranes stood like steel birds waiting for orders. It ran through gutters already choked, with festival paper slid down the black windows of government buildings and turned the mountain roads into ribbons of black glass. By dawn, a young man was dead. Brandon Li, 23 years old, only son of Li Ziming, chairman of Li Development Group, had been found inside the crushed wreckage of his black pickup truck on a mountain road north of the city. The first officers called it a traffic accident. Wet road, poor visibility, driver lost control, the kind of conclusion that let paperwork move quickly and powerful families grieve privately. But Captain Shen Wei stood in the rain beside the wreckage and did not like the road. He did not like the angle of the impact. He did not like the second set of tire marks, half erased by water. Most of all, he did not like the words carved into the mud near the guardrail with a broken branch. The vote has passed. Across the ocean, a retired American detective named Ray Dunbar had not yet heard Brandon Lee's name. But before the week was over, the dead boy, the woman in pink, and the rain over Chongqing would pull him into a case he had no authority to touch and no chance of walking away from. The Dragon Boat Festival had turned the city strange. Families tied mugwort above their doors to keep evil away. Children threw paper boats into drainage canals, and the smell of sticky rice wrapped in bamboo leaves drifted through alleys that had not seen a breeze in days. Captain Shen had been at his desk since 6 in the morning, a cup of tea gone cold beside his hand, the Brandon Lee file open beneath the flickering office light. The case should have been simple, and that was what bothered him. Brandon was rich, careless, fast behind the wheel, and known for drinking too much at private clubs, where cameras conveniently stopped working. If a man like that died on a wet mountain road, most people would not ask complicated questions. But Shen had worked homicide for 21 years. He had seen accidents. This was not one. The tire marks suggested another vehicle had forced Brandon toward the guardrail. The traffic camera on the lower bend had gone dark for exactly 93 seconds. And 3 hours before Brandon died, an anonymous post had appeared on a hidden forum. The heir has been entered. Final vote open. The first name attached to the second vehicle was Shu Yi, 26 years old, former engineering student, no serious criminal history. Mother deceased. Father deceased. Address listed in an old district that no longer existed except in land records and memory. His car had been found abandoned 10 kilometers from the crash site, front bumper cracked. Right headlight shattered, mud packed into the wheel well. When officers arrested him in a rented room near the railway station, he did not run. He did not cry. He only asked whether Brandon Lee was dead. At first, Shu Yi said it was an accident. He said the rain was too heavy, Brandon's truck swerved first, and everything happened too fast. He repeated the same statement 3 times to 3 different officers. Same words, same pauses, same careful grief. Shen read the transcript twice and then a 3rd time. Men who lied badly changed details. Men who lied well changed emotion. Shu Yi's emotion never moved at all. 2 days before formal charges were filed, the detention center called Shen directly. Shu Yi had requested a private meeting, not with his lawyer, not with the case officer assigned to the crash, with Captain Shen Wei by name. Shen drove to Chongqing Detention Center number 3 in festival traffic, the rain making the westbound lane crawl like an old wound, refusing to close. Paper boats drifted in roadside ditches. Someone had tied red string around a telephone pole for luck. Shen did not feel lucky. The detention center sat on the eastern edge of the city, a grey concrete block pressed against the hills. Someone had hung mugwort above the intake door, old superstition against evil spirits. Shen noticed it as he passed beneath it. He noticed everything now. The guard led him down a corridor that smelled of disinfectant, boiled cabbage, and despair. Room 7 waited at the end, lit by a fluorescent tube that flickered every 6 seconds. Shu Yi was already seated when Shen entered. That was the first wrong thing. Prisoners did not arrive before the officer. Not in rooms like this. The architecture of interrogation was built on waiting. The chair, the door, the placement of the table, the officer deciding when to sit and when to speak. All of it existed to remind a man who held the power. But Shu Yi sat with his back straight, hands folded on the table, eyes fixed on the door, as if he'd known exactly when Shen would enter. He looked younger than his file, and older than his age. 26, light-framed, hollow-cheeked, with the pale, sharpened face of someone who had spent too many nights inside his own head. "Captain Shen," he said. Not a greeting, a confirmation. Shen pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "You asked for me by name." Shu Yi nodded once. "I wanted someone who would understand the difference between an accident and a decision." "It wasn't an accident," Shu Yi said. He said it without drama, without collapse, without the wet-eyed pleading Shen had heard from 1,000 men in 1,000 rooms. He said it like a man placing a stone on a table. "I knew where Brandon Li would be. I knew what road he would take. I knew the rain would make the bend dangerous. I knew if I came in from the outer lane at the right moment, he would have to choose between the guardrail and the slope." Shen opened his notebook but did not write. "And you chose that moment." "Yes, you understand what you're saying. I understand." Intentional homicide. In China, those words did not simply change a case. They changed a man's future. Shu Yi knew that. He confessed anyway. Outside the room, somewhere beyond concrete walls and coiled wire firecrackers, cracked faintly through the rain. The sound arrived wrong for the moment, too festive, too alive. "Why?" Brandon Li Shen asked. The name moved across Shu Yi's face like a shadow. Not rage, not grief. Something older than both. The memory of a wound that had healed wrong. Because his father destroyed mine. Shen wrote one name, Li Ziming. Shu Yi watched the pen move. "You already know who he is. I know he owns half the construction contracts in this city. He owns more than that." Shen waited. Shu Yi looked past him toward the blank wall, and for a moment he was not in room 7 anymore. He was 15 years old again, standing in a courtyard that no longer existed. "My family had land in Shapingba," he said. 12 mu, an old house, a well, pomegranate trees. My grandfather built the east wall with his own hands. My father used to say, a man who sells his ancestors' roof sells his own sky. Li development first came with polite papers, compensation forms, relocation notices, red stamps, official language, men in white shirts who smiled without using their eyes. Shu Yi's father, Shu Guohua, refused. He had land records, old deeds, survey copies, and neighbors old enough to remember when the house had been built. He filed complaints with the district office. The district office lost them. He went to the municipal bureau. They told him to wait. He found a reporter. The story ran 2 paragraphs on page 11 and disappeared. 3 weeks later, Shu Guohua was found dead inside the old family granary. The report said he was drunk and fell through a rotted floor. Shu Yi looked at Shen when he said the word drunk. My father did not drink. There was no heat in the answer. That made it colder. He walked through that granary in the dark when he was 10, 20, 50. He did not fall. He was put there. What happened to the documents? Shen asked. Shu Yi's hands tightened. Gone by morning. The originals. Gone. Copies. For the first time, Shu Yi's eyes shifted. There it was. A fracture line. Shen closed his notebook halfway. Someone else knew about the copies. Shu Yi said nothing, but silence had its own weight. The forum knew, he said finally. The words stayed in the room like smoke. Forum. Shen had expected revenge. Family grievance. A rich man's son paying for a father's sins. Ugly but ordinary. This was different. Shu Yi lowered his voice. It called itself Death Note. Shen had seen that phrase once already in the mud beside Brandon Lee's truck. He had seen it again in a tech report connected to an encrypted message board. Now spoken aloud by the man who had driven the second vehicle, it sounded less like a name and more like a door opening. Su Yai found the forum when he was 17. At first it was buried inside an anime discussion board, pirated scans, long arguments, teenagers pretending stories made them philosophers. The manga was called Death Note. A boy finds a notebook. Any name written inside it dies. The boy calls himself Kira and decides he will cleanse the world of evil. I was 17, Shu Yi said. My father was dead. My mother was sick from working double shifts. Our house was gone. The men responsible were giving speeches about urban progress. So yes, I understood the fantasy. At first the forum discussed justice as an idea. Law, punishment, whether a system that protected the powerful still deserved obedience. Most people left when the conversation became specific. Then came names, real names, addresses, schedules, case files, men accused and cleared, men fined instead of prosecuted, men protected by money. The forum stopped being a fantasy. It became a court. The man who shaped the forum called himself Kira, but his real name was Li Ziming. He had been a law student then, older than the others. Patient, precise, never angry. In the way the damaged young men were angry. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He wrote like a judge and waited for people to mistake style for truth. He never gave orders, Shu Yi said. That is the part you have to understand. He built the room so orders were unnecessary. Li Ziming would post a name. Then the forum would discuss. People would bring documents, photos, testimonies, addresses, old court decisions. Then they would vote. By the end, everyone felt responsible, so no one felt responsible. And Brandon Li Shen asked. Shu Yi looked down. Brandon was not the first name. He was only the first name I acted on. Shen returned to the precinct after midnight with Shu Yi's confession recorded, and a storm crawling over the river. The third floor was nearly empty. The festival had thinned the building to duty officers, tired clerks, and the kind of silence that made old cases louder. Shen pulled the Li development file himself. Li Ziming had been careful for 30 years. No direct criminal convictions. Civil disputes settled. Labour complaints withdrawn. Land seizures legalized through district committees. Safety violations paid off before they matured into prosecutions. Men like him did not beat the system. They became part of it. Shen spread the documents across his desk. Shu family land dispute missing complaints. No autopsy on Shu Guohua destroyed property records. Then he found a photograph from a Lai development charity event. Brandon Li stood smiling in a hard hat. Behind him, blurred but unmistakable, was a woman in a pale pink dress. Shen leaned closer to the photograph. He had seen thousands of faces in files. Most disappeared the moment the page turned. This one stayed. She was the same woman he had seen near the crash site, standing at the edge of the police line in the rain. He called his tech officer. Find her. 10 minutes later, the name came back. Claire Dolan, American citizen, 25. Former volunteer researcher with an urban displacement NGO. Publicly linked to Brandon Li for 6 months. No current address in the city. Shen read the message twice. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown sender. He knows you have the boy. Shen did not move. A second message appeared. The room isn't as private as you think. Across the office, the fluorescent tube flickered once and went dark. Ray Dunbar arrived in Chongqing 2 days later, soaked through and already angry. He was 56, American, retired from homicide in Philadelphia, though men like Dunbar never really retired from anything. They only changed the rooms where they carried the dead. His hair had gone iron grey at the temples. His coat looked as if it had survived worse weather than China could offer. Officially, he was there as a consultant. Unofficially, he was there because Claire Dolan's father had known someone in Washington. Someone in the embassy had called someone in Beijing, and someone in Beijing had decided that letting an old American detective stand in a corner was easier than explaining why not. Shen did not like consultants. He especially did not like foreign consultants with tired eyes and opinions. Dunbar stood beside Shen's desk, looked at the caseboard and said, Claire loved Brandon, and she thinks she helped get him killed. Dunbar told Shen that Claire and Brandon's relationship had been quiet, almost hidden. Brandon was the son of a powerful developer. Claire worked with displaced families whose homes had been swallowed by companies like his. It should have made them enemies. Instead, it had made Brandon curious, then ashamed, then dangerous. Dangerous to whom Shen asked. To his father, Dunbar said. Brandon had found files inside Li Development old settlement agreements, forged approvals records of families pressured into signing away land, and at least 5 suspicious deaths buried under words like accident and compensation. Claire believed Brandon was preparing to leak the files, but before he could, his name appeared on the Death Note forum. Not as Brandon the whistleblower, not as Brandon the son trying to repair what his father had done. As Brandon Li, heir to Li Development. Bloodline symbol target. The next morning, Shen and Dunbar went to the old Shu family land. Almost nothing remained. The pomegranate trees were gone. The well had been sealed beneath concrete. The courtyard had been replaced by a glass-walled sales office with a smiling banner that read Future River Residents, a new life above the city. Rain slid down the printed faces and warped their smiles. Shu Yi's house had stood somewhere beneath the model apartment display. Behind the sales office, half buried beneath tarps and broken rebar, they found the old granary foundation. A dead space in the development plan. Too small to sell, too inconvenient to explain. Shen crouched near the foundation wall and saw rusted wire twisted around a stone. Nothing was attached now, but he could imagine what had been there, a land deed tied to a fence by a man who still believed truth could become heavy if enough people saw it. They met Claire Dolan in an old tea house near the river, the kind of place tourists passed without seeing because it did not glow, advertise, or apologize for being old. She wore the same pale pink dress from the photograph, though now a grey coat covered her shoulders, and dark circles sat under her eyes. Her hands trembled when she lifted the cup. Dunbar sat beside Shen, but let him speak. "You were at the crash site," Shen said. Claire lowered her eyes. "Yes. And at the Li Development Charity event." "Yes." "You knew Brandon Li." Her voice nearly broke on the answer. "I loved him." The sentence was small, but it changed the air around the table. Outside, rain slid down the old window glass. Inside, no one touched the tea. Brandon had once told her in a hotel stairwell after a charity dinner that he was tired of smiling beside buildings built over other people's grief. He had said he wanted to make it right. Claire had believed him. That was the cruelest part. Claire admitted she had found the forum before Brandon did. At first, she thought Li Ziming was a whistleblower. He sent her private messages with documents about land seizures, workplace deaths, missing complaints, and families erased by redevelopment projects. He knew her research. He knew Brandon was close to her. He knew she wanted the truth exposed. "What did you give him?" Shen asked. Claire's hands tightened around the cup. "Brandon's schedule." Dunbar went very still. Claire could not look at him. "I thought Li Ziming wanted to pressure him, scare him, force him to release the documents before his father buried everything. I thought if Brandon saw the damage clearly enough, he would choose the truth. And instead, Brandon's name appeared on the forum." She swallowed. "I told Li Ziming Brandon was going to release the files. He said justice does not wait for heirs to develop a conscience." Shen's team broke through the forum archive 2 days later. The Death Note group had started as dozens of users, students, office workers, angry sons, grieving daughters, people who talked about justice the way other people talked about weather. Loudly, constantly, meaninglessly. Then the group had culled itself. Week 143 active members. Week 6 19. Week 12 7. Week 16 3. The moderates left first. The frightened ones left next. What remained was not a community. It was a cell. At the center was Li Ziming writing under the name Kira, never giving orders, only sharpening language until it could cut. "The law is not broken," he wrote. "It functions exactly as designed. Inaction is a choice with a body count. Justice does not require permission from the system that failed." Shen read each line and felt the old anger rise in him. Not because the words were entirely false, because Li Ziming had hidden poison inside truth. They arrested Li Ziming at a university lecture hall. He was 31 years old, dressed in a black coat, giving a guest lecture on legal ethics to a room full of students who did not know they were listening to a man who had built a murder machine in the dark. The board behind him read "Law, Morality, and the Limits of State Power." When Shen entered with 2 officers, Li Ziming stopped mid-sentence and smiled faintly. Not surprised, almost amused. He did not run. He allowed the officers to take his bag. He allowed them to place him in the car. He even asked if he could finish his lecture another time. No one answered. Through the rain-streaked car window, Li Ziming watched the campus slide away with the calm of a man who believed arrest was not an ending, only another room. In the interrogation room, Li Ziming sat across from Shen with perfect posture. Dunbar watched from behind the glass. Li Ziming's face was narrow, composed, intelligent in a way that made Shen tired. Not because intelligence was rare, because intelligence without mercy was one of the oldest weapons in the world. "You built the Death Note forum," Shen said. Li Ziming looked at the recorder. "Is that the official wording it can be? I moderated an online discussion community. You posted names. I posted public information. You posted addresses, routines, private documents. Information wants to move, Captain." Shen leaned forward. People died. Li Ziming's expression did not change. People die under legal systems every day. There it was. Not denial. Architecture. "You turned grieving people into weapons," Shen said. Li Ziming almost smiled. "No, I gave them language for pain the courts had already ignored. You gave them targets. I gave them clarity." Behind the glass, Dunbar lit a cigarette in a room where smoking was not allowed. Shen placed Shu Yi's confession on the table. "He named you." For the first time, something small moved in Li Ziming's face. Not fear, irritation. "That is unfortunate. For you, for him." "You don't care that Brandon Lee died. I care that he died before the full evidence had been released." Shen's hand tightened round the pen. Li Ziming noticed. Of course he noticed. "You think I am a monster," he said. "But monsters do not create injustice. They answer it." Shen looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said. "They feed on it." The prosecutors did not sleep much after that. 300 pages of archived forum posts. 11 former members across 6 provinces. 2 suicides connected to targets who had been voted on but never attacked. 1 assault case in Wuxi. 1 poisoning in Dongguan that had been ruled accidental. 1 missing man in Sichuan. The Death Note forum had started as a discussion board, then a philosophy group, then a court, then a weapon. Li Ziming had been careful. He never wrote "kill him." He never wrote "do it tonight." He never wrote anything simple enough to hang a charge on. He wrote instead in principles, in questions, in sentences clean enough to pass through a legal sieve. But beneath those sentences were names, routes, addresses, photographs, and votes. Shen knew the case would be difficult. Men like Li Ziming lived in gaps between intention and action, between speech and order, between philosophy and blood. Then, while Li Ziming was already in custody, the forum posted one final message from a scheduled account. "The room remains open. No threat, no instruction, just 4 words clean and patient as a locked door waiting for the next hand to turn the knob." Shu Yi asked to see Shen one more time before the trial. He looked thinner. The stillness was no longer strategic. It was exhaustion. "They arrested him," Shu Yi said. "Yes." "Li Ziming." "Yes." Shu Yi closed his eyes. For a moment Shen thought he might cry. He did not. "I thought I would feel something," Shu Yi said. "Relief. anger, but there's nothing. That happens. I killed a man because I thought it would balance something. Shen said nothing. It didn't. No. Shu Yi opened his eyes. Brandon was going to expose his father, wasn't he? Shen did not soften the answer. Yes. The word struck Shu Yi harder than accusation. He looked down at his hands. I didn't know. I believe you. That does not change what I did. No. Shu Yi nodded slowly. Li Ziming built the room, but I walked in. He placed the knife on the table, but I picked it up. The trial lasted 9 days. The city moved on around it in the way cities always move on. Rain continued. Traffic thickened. Restaurants reopened after the festival. Men in office towers discussed contracts. Somewhere another development project broke ground on land that had once belonged to someone who remembered its old name. The courtroom was a grey concrete box on the 3rd floor of the municipal court. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Shu Yi sat at one table in a state-issued suit that did not fit his shoulders. Li Ziming sat at the other in an identical suit, as if the court had decided symmetry was a form of accusation. Dunbar sat in the back with Claire Dolan. She wore the pink dress again. No one asked why. Perhaps grief sometimes chooses its own uniform. The prosecutors played the forum logs on a screen. Post by post, vote by vote, name by name, former members testified behind screens. Some cried. Some denied responsibility, even while admitting they had voted. One man said he thought it was symbolic. Another said everyone knew what the votes meant, but no one said it aloud. A woman from Sichuan said the forum made her feel seen for the first time after her brother died in a mine collapse. Then she looked at Li Ziming and said, "He made my pain useful to him." Li Ziming did not react. Claire testified on the 5th day. Her voice trembled when she admitted giving Brandon's schedule to Li Ziming. The defense tried to make her the true cause. She lowered her eyes, then said, "I wanted Brandon to tell the truth." Li Ziming wanted him to become an example. That sentence stayed in the courtroom. Shu Yi testified on the 7th day. He did not blame Li Ziming. That surprised everyone except Shen. "I was not hypnotized," Shu Yi said. "I was not forced. I wanted Brandon Li to pay for what his father did. Li Ziming gave me words, but I gave those words a body. I forced his truck toward the guardrail. I made the choice. I made the choice." The prosecutor asked why he had chosen to testify against Li Ziming. Shu Yi looked across the courtroom at the man who had once given his grief a language. "Because he is still building rooms." Li Ziming smiled then. Only once. Small. Almost tender, as if Shu Yi had finally said something worthy of him. The verdict came down 2 days later. Shu Yi was found guilty of intentional homicide. Death sentence suspended for 2 years. Li Ziming received the same sentence for criminal incitement, conspiracy, and the ideological organization of targeted violence. The architect and the instrument had been measured equal by the court's blunt geometry. Outside, the courthouse steps were slick and black with rain. People moved quickly beneath umbrellas. Reporters packed their cameras. Lawyers folded documents into waterproof cases. Families of the dead walked out with faces too complicated to name. Not relieved. Not satisfied. Just finished in the way people look when a wound finally closes and they realize the scar will still hurt when the weather changes. Dunbar stood halfway down the steps and tried to light a cigarette. The rain killed it before it had any right to. Then he saw her. Claire Dolan stood at the bottom of the steps in the pink dress. No umbrella, no coat. Rain flattening her hair against her face. She faced the courthouse doors. The doors Shu Yi had gone through. The doors Li Ziming had gone through. The doors Brandon Lee would never walk through at all. Shen stood beside Dunbar. Neither man spoke. For a long time Claire did not move. Then, barely louder than rain, she said one word. Sorry. Not to Dunbar. Not to Shen. Not to the court. To Brandon, maybe. To Shu Yi's father. To Shu Yi. To every person whose grief had been fed into Li Ziming's machine. To the dead who had become arguments. To the living who had become weapons. The rain took the word. The stone steps held it. The city swallowed it whole and asked for nothing more. Dunbar's notebook was full of facts, dates, names, charges, sentences. Enough material for a report no one would want to read twice. But for the first time in the whole ugly case, he could not write a single word. Some endings do not close. They just stop. And the rain kept falling on a city that had already moved on, indifferent as justice, cold as the truth they had come all this way to find.